Welcome to Orthodox Christian Theology. This is Craig Truglia, and Father John's supposed to be with us today. Hopefully he makes it. Pray for Father John. Not sure what happened here, but hey, I got a replacement here. Looks sort of like Father John's my wife. How are we doing, Stephanie?
Good. Sorry, you guys. You got to settle down with me. But...
Yeah, and she's telling me where to put this microphone. It's probably ruining the voice quality more than normal. But we want to have a fun show today on Protestant confessions. Both my wife and I are converts from Protestantism. And we actually remember some of the stuff we struggled with. So it'd be fun. Talk about your own Protestant confessions and things that you grappled with becoming Orthodox, or maybe things you're grappling with and now. So anyway, not sure if you remember, but years ago, I actually made an article called Reasons for Eastern Orthodoxy on my Reformed blog. And it was to kind of justify to everyone why I was leaving Reformed theology and becoming an Orthodox Christian. And like, unlike most people, at least it seems like today, that convert, like, I didn't think everything was perfect. Most people are like, my religion's perfect. There's no problems. But like the ethos, I think, of both of us was like, well, no one's perfect. No denomination's perfect. Just orthodoxy's the best because everyone else is schismatic. And we don't want to commit any sort of sin by being in a schismatic body. So we still had all these questions. So in this article, Reasons for Eastern Orthodoxy, I put at least my reasons that might be different than Stephanie's here. But that being said, it's stuff that I was struggling with at the time, not so much anymore, to be perfectly honest. We got a fan from Finland. How on earth does anyone pronounce that? Heikahemo?
Okay.
Well, Finland really kicked butt during World War II, so that was pretty cool. So greetings to you too, friend. So that being said, let me, before I even start naming things, article, biggest struggle I'm going to confess with Orthodoxy. Just looks so weird and gross, right? They're sticking the spoon in everyone's mouth. Right, the first time you saw that, wasn't that disgusting?
Yeah, it's very unsanitary.
It's very unsanitary. It's putting the same spoon in everyone's mouth. And right, if you're converting from Protestantism, you know, you don't really have this high view of the Eucharist. So it's like everyone drinking out of the same cup. It's very disgusting. And, you know, but with a high Eucharist theology, it doesn't even gross you out at all. In fact, like, oh, I'll go last. I'll let everyone go first. They got kids, this and that. And you're not grossed out having the spoon after it's been in everyone's mouth. The question is, do you think the fluid level in the Eucharist starts increasing from all the saliva?
No.
No, you don't think that happens? So that was a big adjustment.
Yes, and kissing the icons, it's kind of similar, right? Everyone kisses the same thing, so you've got everyone lips on that one.
It's like everyone kissing the icons. Even grosser, if like kids' wet lips are on it, or someone's lipstick. But just in general, the idea that you're kissing an icon when you have no attachment to this icon at all, that was a big adjustment. That was strange. And I think our priest at the time had a good thing. Go, just do a little nod to the icon. Because the idea is like the gesture, you're starting to kind of like conform your heart to it, and it slowly works on your heart. And then when your heart's ready, you feel fine kissing the icons. And it's strange because as you're converting, like you're becoming an equal community member of the church, but you're not like someone who's there for years, where they have a very strong relationship with the Theotokos and the saints, and like you're almost faking it, right? Like, well, it's like, I guess I gotta start loving these saints, you know.
Fake it till I make it.
Fake it till I make it. Well, you're not gonna like this example, but here's what I compare it to, right? So like the church is like a really hot chick. All right, because bride Christ is the church. But you really love like Christ when you're a convert, right? And so like think of a guy, he marries the stepmother, right? So he marries stepmother because he's kind of being, oh, she's really hot. I'm going to marry this stepmother here. But then the problem is now you got all these kids and stuff, right? You got kids from wherever else, the previous marriage or whatever. And so now you got to start loving those kids because you married into that. So yes, a little crude example, a little colorful, like your dress, right? It's a little bit of a colorful example. It's very red. And the earrings, look at this. Even the earrings too. So it's colorful. But right, you become Orthodox because you love God, and now you get all the stepchildren, which are the saints. right? God has adopted the saints. We're all God's children, but by adoption, only Christ is eternally begotten of the Father, clearly. So that being said, like right now, you adopt all these saints and you have to love them too. And it's like sort of like, all right, son, let me take you out camping, I suppose, right? Like it's because again, there's a relationship you have to work on in order to have that sort of love. And so, like in the beginning, like how did it feel for you to try to start having this relationship with the saints?
I didn't really feel it at first, I think. But after being Orthodox for a while, it's organically you start to, when you learn more about the saints and you start to ask them for prayers, just like how you ask your close friends for prayers, the connection starts to get stronger and deeper, I think. Like now, I can't imagine not having any saints. I feel like they are better than your best friends, right? Sometimes better than your family almost.
Because they can't disappoint.
Yeah.
Unless it's saying Honorius doesn't find something.
Yeah, and they don't hurt you. They might not disappoint you. Yeah, they don't betray you like Judas betrayed Jesus, or it's like,
yeah, we don't venerate Judas.
No,
that's for
but
sure.
I'm saying, like, as our human friends, they have flaws just like ourselves. So we'll disappoint each other, but the saints don't disappoint us.
And I think like a big thing, and I'll show my prop, and then we'll get into a few cool audience comments here, is like the prayer books, right? And this is one of our originals. It's not used even every day, and you can see what happens with the prayer books with common use. And the prayers start conforming your heart because it's a rule and has all these beautiful prayers to God. Then it mixes in probably 1 to 10, prayers to certain saints, mostly the Theotokos, your patron saint. And so you start kind of getting used to it that way. And in the service, right, almost all the litanies are to God. There's like one main commemoration of the Theotokos after the consecration of the Eucharist. And so like you kind of start getting into it that way. So it's just something that slowly works in your heart. But at first it's somewhat jarring and it just takes time. And so if you're not there yet, because you're a pretty new convert, that is not at all strange. The strange thing would be if you automatically have an attachment.
Yeah.
So like, Pastor Ben from Cleave to Antiquity, he actually is now a very strong relationship with Theotokos, but it's because he was converted by like a spiritual experience to Theotokos, right? Like he had a spiritual experience converting to Orthodoxy, and like we more just made an analytical decision almost. So, right, like we didn't have that sort of spiritual experience. So I'm not gonna say it's true of everyone, but being that most people are watching my YouTube videos, they're probably weighing options and being somewhat analytical about it. Now, we got some people complaining about we got gross communion too in Protestantism, right? So we have this: Anglicans drank from the same cup and Lutherans, but other Protestants drank from wee shot-style glasses. Okay, here's the difference, because Lutherans do that. Remember, the Lutherans would intinct, which is like the dip their wafer in, and the holier people would actually drink from the chalice, and then they'd wipe it off. And do the Roman Catholics also wipe it off? Yeah. And they'll wipe it off. So it's like a little less gross, I suppose. They wiped it off. The difference is the spoon's in everyone's mouth, right? So it's not like, your lips are on it. It's like, no, that was like in their mouth. It's just a little more jarring.
They close it.
And they close their mouth, and it's a little more jarring. So I still think the Orthodox take the cake for grossness. We have Protestant here. We never drank from the same cup. And we have this from our Lutheran friend. To be fair to our mainline Protestants, Catholics drink from the same chalice. Basically the same. Can imagine make or break for anyone. Again, I still think we win the grossness award. I unless like someone did something like, the Syrians and the Roman Catholics that commune on the tongue.
Yeah.
Like if their hand was dirty, but I don't think anyone does anything that gross.
Yeah.
I'm sure they're nice and they don't do that. Here's one: kissing a man's hand. Let me bless you, and like, hey, kiss your hand, and it is that was jarring as well. I do agree. Right? Where is their blessing? I've never seen Roman Catholic. I'm sure they have an equivalent, but I don't see Roman Catholics kissing hands.
Yeah.
Maybe in the old world, I don't know. Commenters, do Roman Catholics kiss hands? That was jarring. To be honest, and some priests don't like it. They'll just like do with your head. They'll take the hand away from you, which I think is wrong. It's funny once you get Orthodox enough, rule of thumb, remember 10 years, supposed to take 10 years for you to start becoming Orthodox. And now when a priest doesn't give you the hand, like, what's wrong with that? I don't know, maybe I don't take it personal. I just think I don't feel as blessed.
It's almost like cultural thing too. I think Orthodoxy in America is a little different.
Oh, look at this question. Do you not wipe the spoon after? No.
No. Right back in.
It goes right back into the chalice. No wiping of spoons. What are you talking about? I'm telling you, we win the grossness awards. We used to have this from been Orthodox a few years, communed at liturgy today. I at least don't close my lips around the spoon, more of a placement of the tongue. Oh, he's not Lutheran. He's a convert. Okay, it's the whole spoon thing. My whole motivation is simply that it's easy for the priest and that you don't lose any of his blood.
Yeah,
right. It's that's more my mentality. I don't know if there's a careful thought process other than let's not let any of his blood spill.
Yeah, we do see some other Orthodox Christians, they don't close their lips, but I think it's not.
The motivation is the same. The intent is the same. It's just we don't want to spill his blood.
Yeah.
In traditional Catholicism, we kiss hands of priests and bishops. So apparently they always did. It's just the Protestantization of modern Roman Catholicism. That's interesting. Thank you, Jay. That's something I did not know, but I suspected something like that. So here are something for me. I'll start going down my list of things that I didn't agree with. I'm going to confess I didn't agree with right away, which was pedobaptism, right? Because we came from a Reformed Baptist church in the beginning, and we weren't like one of those converts like, there's something missing in my life. There's something wrong in my life. We were totally fine with church. We loved our Sundays. It was great. It came at a tremendous self-sacrifice to kind of cut ourselves off from friends and stuff to become Orthodox. And among those things was adjustment was pedobaptism. And to quote my very newly catechumen self, I wrote, clearly the scripture speaks of believers' baptism, which, right, they're converting people. And such baptism was the dominant mold of the early church, which is actually not historically true, but what I believed at the time. Even in believing families, pedobaptism is an obvious break with early church practices, I thought. If I were to employ a pure historical method in addressing the question, it is worth noting, so I was aware, that Cyprian is the only aberration within the first 3 centuries of the church. Cyprian does mention an issue with baptism with children. So like we do know it was happening pre-Nicaea, but I do think a stronger historical case than at least in the apologetic sphere than a lot of people appreciate could be made for patristic believers' baptism. But that being said, that was something that was hard for me because it's like I thought it was theologically wrong, and unless like you are, I don't know, way more confident in other people than I am, I'm a little more of a cynical, skeptical person. I'm like, all right, they believe in pedobaptism. And I didn't think this was a church dividing issue as a Protestant, right? We didn't think there's anything wrong with Presbyterians. So like, then why would this be an issue with Orthodox, right? So I think that doesn't get talked about a lot, which is, everyone's like, oh, look, Roman Catholics or Eastern Orthodox, they're wrong because look at this one thing they might be wrong about. Keywords might, right? They might be wrong about this. But in Protestantism, it's admitted, yeah, well, they're wrong about all sorts of stuff. So it's like this different standard. Right? The standard for Eastern Orthodox is absolute perfection, and the standard for everyone else is it's okay if they're wrong about 15% of everything. But like I'm going to give myself a pat in the back. I held equal standards. If I was willing to accept some things I didn't agree with beforehand, why would I not accept the same level of stuff after the fact? Now, we got some disagreement here. I can't imagine me on the fence about that for pretty long. From Protestant perspective, pedobaptism will probably be lower on the ladder than saints, relics, etc. That's the thing. It's really just not a church divided issue for Protestant. I mean, was that an issue for you that there's baptizing children versus adults?
No, because I was a Presbyterian before I became a Baptist.
So yeah, so there you go. We have a cradle Presbyterian here. I have people ask me, so they're all Presbyterian in Cambodia? I'm like, no, that's not Korea.
Yeah. They're everything.
They're everything. There we go. Cambodians are everything. The monarchical episcopacy, which means like apostolic succession, there's a single bishop, while Presbyterians believe like it's a bunch of elders in the church, if you remember, right? Mm-hmm. And so I believed in kind of like the normie academic argument that the original church was more Presbyterian, and then it developed more monarchical over time. And I cited back in the day the scripture, the Didache, First Clement, that small cities would have several presbyters or bishops. But I conceded that the Orthodox ecclesiology may also be rightly derived from the scriptures. And so again, and look, guess who's coming on? Father John, look who I replaced you with.
Someone a lot better looking.
But I don't know, Father John. I think you have more hair on your chin than my wife has on her head. What do you think, Stephanie?
I think so.
You're gonna have to get uncomfortably close to me if we're gonna get you on screen, babe. Maybe if we do this. There we go. All right. She doesn't have to get too. I should have just lied to her. So, Father, I'm just gonna work on the audio to see if I could make it where the speakers make noise so we could all hear each other.
Okay.
And guys, let me know if there's weird echoes. Father, you hear any echoes?
No.
Echo canceling technology. So we've been going through.
First, can we get your blessing, Father? Virtual blessing?
God bless.
Let's see. Father, you and I just always get right to it in these videos, but my wife's more decorum, right? Definitely more decorum here. And Father, feel free to grab Matushka at some point to surprise her. Just that she doesn't even know if she's coming on it. There we go. We have Father John. Oh, echo, echo, echo. Father John, my favorite online priest. Father, were you ever planning on being an online priest?
It wasn't something I grew up thinking about.
So, kind of though with your story, did you grow up thinking about being a Protestant pastor at all?
Yeah, I mean, when I was a kid, I did think about it, yes.
And so it kind of makes sense where everything aligns and you end up being a clergyman of some sort. And
Yeah.
so, like, how about we start from the top for you? Because my wife and I have already been, as we'd say in New York, yenting a little bit about this issue. What were some of the things when you're first converting that were difficult, if anything, in becoming Orthodox? We already talked about that. We thought it was gross. The spoon went in everyone's mouth.
You know, the reason why I'm 30 minutes late here is I fell asleep sitting on my chair, and so my brain is not fully engaged. I looked at the clock after I woke up, and I realized, oh my goodness. So I apologize for that. But ask that question again, and my brain hopefully will start engaging again.
Oh no, we're trying to get Father John awake, and we're very grateful for you coming on, even after a priest needs a good nap, right? Don't you get worn out by all the converts? So it's I heard you were at Father Moses' church on Monday. We missed each other. I was there on Sunday morning.
Yeah, it was their feast day.
And so he has like a Q&A after liturgy and all this. It's very, because there's so many new converts at that parish. So like,
right.
So they take all that energy from you, I'm sure, Father. So let me ask that question again. When you first decided to become Orthodox, did you view like everything about Orthodoxy is 100% right? Or you had certain things that made you uncomfortable, certain things you weren't sure about? And what were those things?
I mean, when I first became Orthodox, I mean, what I think about Protestantism, or did I think that everything about Orthodoxy was superior to Protestantism? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, remember when Mr. Shupin, sadly he apostatized, and all of a sudden everything about Reformed theology became perfect. And I thought, like, that's kind of bizarre. Usually you have a few misgivings and a few things that you, at least in the beginning, are more certain of from your former things. So it takes time to transition out. So like before that full transition for you, Father, what were the things that were strange to you?
Well, when I started digging into Orthodoxy, it took me about a year before I became convinced that the Orthodox Church was it. But I can't remember after I reached the point where I was ready to embrace Orthodoxy, having a lot of reservations about Orthodoxy. But I don't remember having that thought. But it took me a year to get there, though. So there was a period of time when I was still questioning, a lot of things about it.
So what were the main things you're questioning in the beginning?
Well, I remember I was questioning the idea of the veneration of icons, prayers for the dead, the ever virginity of the Virgin Mary, and the idea of asking the saints to pray for us.
Now,
And
let me interrupt on one thing, which is the ever virginity of the Theotokos. Because this is one of those things where, in retrospect, I'm surprised that Protestants, even without historical arguments, don't take this more as a default, right? And so Christ enters into the Theotokos life after the incarnation, right? He, in some way, enters even more into life after he's born, because now you could see him, right? I presume after our son was born, it's like it becomes realer. It's not like he's not in your belly kicking around before then. And so the idea that you would somehow have Christ come into your life and walk out more defiled or deficient, right? It speaks of a very low theology of virginity, even lower than you would see like in 1 Corinthians 7, where even if there's nothing wrong with marriage. Marriage is good. Children are good. St. Paul tells married couples not to deny one another. So there's nothing and no sort of weirdness about things like conjugal relations. But St. Paul says in the same chapter that virginity is better. So why would Christ leave the Theotokos somehow in a state not as good as it could otherwise be if she was virgin? It just seems to me pretty obvious that maintaining her virginity makes sense in that episode. So I'm just surprised that Protestants don't take that for granted for that reason.
Yeah, I didn't think about it in terms of like defilement. It was mainly, the way that I had thought about it as Protestant was primarily, well, obviously the Virgin Mary had other children because Jesus had brothers, so how could that not be the case? And so when I became aware that that's not how the Orthodox Church looked at it, then I was trying to figure out, well, what does the Church always believe? But it was never like I saw one view as having a more defiling view of the Virgin Mary than the other. It was just, was it true or was it not true? And I found enough references to the belief in the ever virginity of the Virgin Mary that one got scratched off the list a lot sooner than some of the other ones did.
Now, what was maybe the single hardest one to scratch off the list?
I remember the idea of the prayers of the saints being one of them. And for me, I also remember how it got scratched off of the list. And that was when I was talking to a neighbor who I lived in an apartment complex at the time. And the guy was a Nazarene, as I was at the time. And he was talking about the wife of an old retired professor as being a woman of prayer. And he said, man, if you ever need something prayed for, you want to go talk to this woman because when she prays, God listens. She's got a hotline to God. And I remember that being kind of like the light bulb going off, that, hey, if we can think that this wife of an old Nazarene professor from the college that I went to was a woman of prayer, then, why would it be such a difficult thing to believe that maybe the mother of Christ himself might have some hotline to God?
I'm also of the belief that children that pray have more of a hotline to God than we do. My son's prayers answered something for a monk friend of ours, and he actually texted with something. I won't get to the personal details, but he requested that my son pray. That's somehow more useful than my own prayers. But on the question of prayers to the saints, how did your relationship with the saints start? Because it's like, for me, it's like I did it. I was being obedient. Like, they handed me, this is my first prayer book, right? And I've since replaced it with this gorgeous hard copy with almost an identical translation because I like staying with the same translation. But the idea that you would be praying out of a book was sort of weird. And then you can't avoid it because it's in a book. There's prayers to the saints. And so I was just doing it out of obedience at the beginning. And now, right, you out of your own heart right? We'll just pray to the Theotokos, to your patron saints, to certain saints. And so, but there's a period of time that happens, right? That has to happen first. So for you, Father, like, was it like just right away? You had a hotline to God through the Theotokos, and there's no adjustment period, or did it take time just for the prayers to start softening your heart?
Yeah, I don't think prior to that conversation that I had that I was actually doing the prayers of the church, but I was going to the Vesper service at an Orthodox church. And so I was, you could say I was praying along during those services. But it was only later on that I got me an Orthodox prayer book. So by the time I actually got an Orthodox prayer book, I didn't have any objections to anything that was in it.
So right away, right at the bat, as comfortable praying to a saint as you were praying to God.
Yeah, once I got to that point, yeah. I mean, for me, I kind of reached a point where when you get to the point where you realize that the church is reliable, you stop needing to be convinced that everything that it teaches is true. You get to a point where you just accept that, well, yeah, the church teaches it, so therefore it has to be true.
No, it's interesting Father brings it up, because like with St. Augustine, he mentions in the Confessions about the scriptures that he runs into hard parts of scriptures. But he says, whenever like I really tease it out and really spend the time, the scriptures end up vindicated. And
Right.
so even when you have a few questions, like these genealogies don't match up. First Chronicles has 8 generations for David, and then like you have 7, let's say, at the end of what's it, Ruth, and stuff like that, right? And so we go, but the scriptures with everything else, when if I really get into it, are reliable. So I'm going to presume there's a good answer for this, even if I don't know it right now. And I
Right.
have to say, with the Orthodox Church, it blows my mind now that like I've become this like somewhat important Orthodox historian, at least on a popular level. It's like when you actually start doing serious historical inquiry, you start finding the traditional case of the church is correct.
Right.
And like I think in recent years, Father, the big one was icons. So remember when Gavin Ortlund had his, big victory parade with his icon video and all that, like, oh, there can't be any response for this. And that motivated a few people, including myself, to like, all right, let's just seriously, really historically looking at this. And lo and behold, the Orthodox case is the strongest case historically.
Right.
And, the most recent art historians, you could read this in the Routledge Handbook of Early Christian Art. And there's certain museum curators that have published in icons where you start finding the modern scholarship is on this. It's just apologetics is behind the 8 ball. So like that being said, it's something like, oh, this is something where I just accepted it because the church is overall reliable. I might not know all the nitty gritty, but then when you're challenged to get into the nitty gritty, lo and behold, you start finding, no, the Orthodox Church is right. And there's a certain point where it's batting 1,000. We're like, all right, let's just give them the attentional walk, right? I'm not gonna try to pitch around this hitter. They're gonna hit a home run out of the ballpark. Now, I have a few comments here from the audience. I'm on my journey to Catholicism, but I love Orthodox so much. You have the most beautiful iconography, and you are a faithful and Christ-loving Christian. So that is a positive comment, even if he's not Orthodox with us. We got from Atomic Lead. What do you think some of the differences in mindset, relative advantages and disadvantages are between Protestants and Roman Catholics becoming Orthodox? So, Father, you deal with converts. Do you think Protestants come with a better mindset to become Orthodox, or Roman Catholics do? And what's easier for you in catechizing them?
Well, it's hard to say that one is better than the other, but they're definitely different. But there are some Catholic converts to Orthodoxy that have more of a Protestant way of looking at things than you might expect. But if somebody comes from a really traditional Catholic background, they definitely have different kinds of questions. But even among Protestants, Protestants from different kinds of backgrounds have different kinds of issues. And so like from my background, theosis was never a problem for me because it was so similar to the doctrine of entire sanctification that when I saw what theosis was, though. Well, that's where John Wesley got it from. But you know, if you came from a Catholic background, you might have some problems with some issues, but there'd probably be a lot of things that you'd have no problem with at all.
It's probably, I would guess, a bell curve in a sense, where someone in the middle of the bell curve is a Roman Catholic. It's probably the easiest to catechize, and they're really low end. Their ideas could be all over the place, like a very low end Protestant, and they're very high ends. They might have such integrated. Could you help me with English? Integrated.
Okay.
Integrated. There you go.
What good is an Asian wife that can't help you with their pronunciation? The such integrated theological views, which are wrong, right? That then that becomes hard to deprogram. In fact, when we're catechized, we were told that you're such hard catechumens because you had such a formed view of theology because we're following R.C. Sproul and things like that. Versus someone who's a blank slate, it's just easy to program.
Yeah.
So,
has your wife ever taught you any rules about English grammar that you didn't know were rules?
Yes.
You just intuitively knew how they worked, but then your wife gave you the actual rule, and you thought, "Wow, I didn't know that." You intuitively knew it, but you didn't know the rule.
ESL people learn the rules of English. They actually know the rules of language, and that's why they pick up multiple languages beyond that much easier.
Yeah.
While if you ask me what a declension is, I'm not exactly sure. Is that like a verb tense?
So English doesn't have it's
verbs are conjugations, and
what's declensions?
Nouns are declension endings. Yeah, different kinds of case endings.
You knew that, hon?
No.
No, all right. She just learned something. So, Father, maybe you spoke English as a second language too. You just don't know. I mean, well, does your wife was born in America though, wasn't she?
No, she was born in Guizhou, China.
And so, so then she's taught you all these English rules and stuff too.
Yeah, she went to Hong Kong when she was like 6, and she was taught English in every grade going to school, but she didn't grow up speaking English. So
where's her English accent?
Well, when I met her, she had a very thick Cantonese accent, but after we'd been married, she as far as most people can detect, she lost her accent, but I can still occasionally hear faint remnants of it. But it's so she came to the United States when she was like 16, and usually if you come to another country after about the age of 13 or 14, you don't lose your accent, but she somehow managed to lose it for the most part.
It probably helped you speaking English for so long before then.
Yeah.
I've noticed in Cambodia, and some of these kids don't have accents. I've noticed even with Russian immigrants, like students, they have less accent than me. People pick on them from New York. This Russian sounds like he's from Chicago, just totally neutral way of talking. So it's they're getting better these days. On the topic of veneration to the saints, I have no problem with the Theotokos assumption, says NO. Icons and intercessions of saints is my concern. I believe avocation of the saints, asking God for their intercession, maybe. And I think some of this is just like you're just not used to it, and so it feels alien to you. And so I'm not gonna, there's so many videos on, we've made them too, Father John, on this topic. I'm not gonna try to convince NO, but instead I will make this comment, which is, as a Protestant, right, our worship was in some sense less devout than what the veneration of the saints is in Orthodoxy. So, right, less flowery language for God in Protestantism than we would address the Theotokos. And so, of course, it's going to be strange to start praying and venerating the Theotokos because you don't treat God that good as a Protestant. Now, when you compare that to as an Orthodox Christian, where we eat God's actual flesh and blood, he's offered himself as a sacrifice because there's actual biblical worship, right? There's actual flesh and blood of God involved. You can't the veneration of the saint. Yes, it's very good, but it doesn't equate to that. Because Protestants don't have that, it feels very jarring. But it's because I feel they haven't actually partaken in actual real worship. It's not they don't want to, but I think that's where the heart issue is there, is my opinion. I don't know if you have any comments. Sounds like you want to say something.
Yeah, I think it's also a little hard because it was hard for me at first too, because we don't know the
Speak
saints.
to Father John here.
But if you, you know, try to learn more about the saints, so maybe read about their lives. Like I really like Saint Paisios now. There's a Greek TV series that you can watch and learn more in depth about his life. So when you know them, now it's not just like a random strangers. No one, you have no clue who they are, what they did, what they went through. So knowing more about them, about their lives, help kind of like bridge or build
Yeah.
a connection between you and the saints. And then it's easier. It's more organic. It feels more natural, more normal.
Well,
Right? It's like we always, as when I was a Protestant, if I have something, if I need something, if I'm going through some difficulties, or I don't know, I have exam the next month, I always ask for other friends to pray for me. So it's kind of same thing. It's just the saints are holier than our human friends. But
Right.
I think I could step away. Even Father John could do this.
no, I think I can relate where the person is coming from, and I think the missing ingredient is not knowing about their lives. So it feels like
Yeah.
we're asking a stranger.
Well, like right here, it says, reading the lives of the saints whose stories I was ignorant of softened me the most toward their veneration. So, Father, how about you answer this question because it's on that note. Should inquirers be reading about the lives of the saints, and how do you pick? What's your recommendation, Father?
I think reading the lives of the saints is something that a lot of people who are coming to Orthodoxy overlook because they're maybe thinking about questions on a higher or a more abstract level, I should say. But I think you learn more about Orthodoxy by reading the lives of the saints than you do by reading abstract books, because in the lives of the saints, it's all very concrete, and so you're seeing how it works when the rubber meets the road, so to speak. And so I think it's something that is very important and should be, you should begin as soon as possible. Now, as far as where you begin, I do think that it's easier for us as modern people to relate to saints who lived close to our own time. So if you read the life of Saint Paisius the Athonite, you might have an easier time relating to them than you would if you were reading an early martyr. But St. John of Shanghai also, he lived in a time close enough to our own to where it's easy to relate to him. And even saints from the 19th century, I think that they're close enough to our time to where they don't seem quite as foreign. But when you start going back to like the martyrs under the Roman Empire, it almost seems as far away as the Bible in terms of it being a different kind of culture.
Yeah, it's like, we have like in recent years, Elder Ephraim of blessed memory, he went shopping at Walmart, right? So like
Right.
you already start establishing a kind of closer connection with a saint like that, versus, this saint who lived in the middle of the wilderness with the Tuva people somewhere out there in Russia and you don't know where, like, it's just harder to establish. I've been to Walmart, right? So it's easier to establish that connection. And I think that's why, to plug the mission in Cambodia, it's why my wife translates the lives of the saints into Khmer and works with Reader John, who is the main translator. You do more of the webmastering and editing for these live saints, because this, I feel, is one of the most important things for people to develop the Orthodox mindset. We're using St. Nikolai Zika's Prologue of Orid because it's very compact, a saint deciding what excisions to make in some of these longer lives, but you still get something out of it that's very beneficial. I feel anyone who's considering Orthodoxy should read just once a day Prologue of Orid, and they're going to get something from that. And if one of your viewers feels the desire to help support the translation of the Live Saints, $10 translates One Life to Saint into the Khmer language. You could go to orthodoxchristiantheology.com/donate. Links to PayPal, Venmo, and if you want to be a monthly contributor to Patreon are below. And I just want to remind people, anyone who believes but is not a missionary has not yet known the beauty of faith, according to Valeriu Gafencu, and who is a modern saint, 20th century, went to high school and college, was already trying to overthrow a country and turn to a Christian nationalist socialist country when he was 20 years old. What have you done by the time you were 20 years old, right? And so this was a saint who, though not yet officially canonized, who really had a heart and desire to do God's will, and really read Saint of the Prisons. What a great book. And it kind of, though, just reminds me, Father, and I'll make us bigger, how sometimes you could pick a modern saint, but could it be a little too much to digest? In my example would be Saint Joseph the Hesychast. That life from Elder Ephraim, he wrote about Saint Joseph the Hesychast. I think that's some very dense, very theologically important reading, but I think it could turn some people off. Could you think of any examples like that, or you maybe even disagree, Father?
Well, it is an interesting phenomenon that saints of very recent times, we have so much information about it that you could totally just get lost in the weeds, I suppose. Like if you take St. Paisius of Mount Athos, he's got 6 volumes of spiritual counsels that have been translated into English, and there might be more that haven't been translated, but we've got this huge life. Whereas for a lot of early saints, we've just got like the account of how they became a martyr, and that might be all we know about them. And so you could read everything there is to know about some of these martyrs of the early church. But when if you're talking about St. Paisius, there's just tons of information. It's just because they're still within living memory. So there's lots of people who have these little bits of information. Plus, there's lots that's been preserved. And, in more ancient times, people had to be a lot more selective about what they were going to preserve, just because writing was so expensive that they just couldn't preserve everything that they knew.
And time's sort of also like a filtering process. It's like it over time, erosion will make rock formations and canyons and things like this. The lives of saints kind of get filtered over time, where the parts that are spiritually beneficial is what the Holy Spirit preserves, right?
Right.
And but when we have some of these saints that live in the modern era, right, we don't know yet what parts are going to be emphasized more in their lives than others. Or we don't know if that's why they lived a certain exemplary life that withstands the public microscope more because of the day and age. Because here's an example, and it's I don't think it's anything scandalous, but something interesting that at Jordanville, one of the parishioners there grew up and was there when St. John of San Francisco, whose relics were uncovered today, was the bishop of her local church. And she remembered fondly that when the teenagers are there, he'd turn on the radio and say, "Oh, go dance." And then he'd, pretty much go to another room and pray for them. And so you have this sort of random story about a saint, he wasn't against teenagers dancing at church to some music. He understood people like to have a little bit of fun. And so I actually think that's a very spiritual beneficial lesson, because you get some weird zealots that think people must live purely spiritual lives, which we ought to work to that point, but that's not where everyone gets, obviously. And so you have this story from a saint where he let people do normal people stuff. And I venture guess the music, even the cool teenager music, wasn't as quite outrageous back then. I don't know. But this is an example of all right, what would be filtered, what might get filtered out over time. I don't know. But we have that with saints from many, many years ago. And just so people aware, you do enough digging, like the Theotokos, you have all sorts of writings on her life and a development of hagiography. So it's a very interesting thing. Now, we got this from Mimi de los Caceres. Hi, Patrick. It was a pleasure to meet you at the baptism. Also, see Father John on Monday. So she must, I'm guessing it's a she with Mimi. Maybe it's a guy.
Yeah.
Was at the Father Moses Church. Someone was correcting me with integrated because I was forgetting. Someone has some Khmer here, honey. What's that say?
They say to speak Khmer.
No, I just speak nonsense. I definitely don't read Khmer. You know, I know enough where I could say a few things that help with the English class, but I need my translator here with me. Father, how much Chinese do you actually? How much Cantonese do you know?
Well, I can speak like toddler level Cantonese. And what's interesting is my own kids never corrected me in my pronunciation, but my oldest granddaughter, there's several times when she said, "Gung Gung," which means maternal grandfather. "Gung Gung, you're saying it wrong." So my confidence in my Cantonese ability has gone downhill quite a bit.
Well, aren't your daughters bordering on polyglots? Like one of them knows Korean or something like that. Like they branched out past just Cantonese.
Right, because they grew up speaking Cantonese, the oldest one taught themselves conversational Japanese, and then the younger one taught themselves Korean. And the younger one, the interesting thing, this is the one that's the politician in the family. She was working at like a clinique counter at a mall, and because she knew a little bit of Japanese and a lot of Korean, and then even more Chinese, when Asian women would come into the store, she could understand enough of what they were saying to tell kind of what they were leaning towards buying. But she didn't. She doesn't look Asian. Most people think when they see her face, they think she's Hispanic. So so she basically would just play dumb, but then she would start saying things to kind of steer them towards buying what they were already leaning towards buying, and then she would make the sale. She was like the number one saleswoman in that company in like the region.
And that's like makeup and lotions and stuff.
What now?
Now it's makeup and lotions.
Yeah, it's a cosmetic.
Well, because the Asian women are very vain. Oh yeah, they're very, very vain.
The point.
Yeah, the point. Once she said in Korean, you buy now. And
Well,
then,
the genius thing about it is that she was only just confirming what they were already leaning towards, and so had she been trying to talk them into buying something they didn't want, she would have had a harder time doing it. But she just confirmed what they were already leaning towards.
Getting an Asian woman to buy beauty products is shooting fish in a barrel. That's what I think.
That's not the moral of the story.
But it's still true. We have how do Orthodox view doctrinal development? It seems like it's essential to proving the Roman Catholic system in contrast to the First Millennium Church. So, Father, I've got lots of opinions, but you are the clergyman here. Do we need doctrinal development to make the Orthodox case firm like the Roman Catholics, or do we reject this?
Well, the thing is you could say that we believe in doctrinal development if you mean by that over time you see some doctrines defined more precisely. But in Roman Catholicism, the idea is more along the lines of doctrinal evolution than that things get defined more precisely. So basically, you could wind up with a doctrine that no one would have recognized, no matter how you defined it in the early church, but it just sort of evolves over the centuries. Whereas in Orthodoxy, you might have a doctrinal controversy that causes people to think about an issue more to where they do spell it out in ways that people didn't get as precise about. But at the end of the day, you're not saying something that the people in centuries previous would have not recognized as being true. Whereas in Roman Catholicism, you could wind up with something that, they'll defend papal supremacy as that being doctrinal development, and even admit in many cases that the ideas that of the papacy that they have today weren't there in the early church, but it just sort of evolved over time. Well, that doesn't make sense to us.
Well, yeah, we believe in the faith that was delivered once and for all to the saints, as
Right.
in Jude 4. But that doesn't mean that like there isn't development in language. Like clearly, you read a Bible in English, there's been some development there. English requires a theological vocabulary that didn't exist. And, you see this now, like in the Khmer language, translating lives of saints, there's lots of words in English we take for granted. Some of them are actually Greek words, but we're just used to saying in English. And there's just no Khmer equivalent. So you actually have to invent vocabulary. So there's definitely terminological development. There's no doubt about this. But what stays the same are the concepts.
Mhm.
And so like we have saints in the first and second century that explicitly speak of God being three persons and one essence. So that's the Nicene doctrine. That's the Constantinopolitan doctrine. So it's not like this doctrine is something new. This doctrine just started getting clarifications that were terminological. So that's a very important distinction to make. And I think it's worth pointing out very simply. If you cannot show that your doctrine, people would have at least recognized it if you gave them enough time to explain the wording to it. It just, this is just the logical conclusion of this, and this over many times, right? Those are two different things. We believe the early church did venerate icons. They might have looked different. The style of veneration might have been a little different, though it actually doesn't look like it was. It looks like there was kissing and crowning. We have that in second century documents. So it's probably was the same, but if there were just some differences in how they're venerated, where they're placed, we see in the early church, sometimes they're more comfortable putting these things on the ground, when that's been regulated out of existence in the East, because like it just feels wrong to step on a cross. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's in the West that stuff sort of continued. But that being said, it's people would recognize what venerating a cross was. They would recognize what praying to a saint was. Maybe the sort of language you'd use and the sort of decorum would develop, but not the doctrine. And I'm starting to hear a crazy noise back there, so I'm going to have to maybe ask my wife to go back there and do that. We might have lost the wife for the show. Maybe she'll come back. We'll see. We will see. When you start hearing metallic noises, I'm afraid that like my son figured out to make the bomb or something. I don't know. So yeah, we don't believe in doctrinal development. There you go. There's the short answer. That we have.
And the thing is, the Roman Catholic Church, I'm quite convinced that within my lifetime, I'm going to see them doctrinally develop their way into accepting homosexuality as being okay. And I know a lot of pious Roman Catholics who say, "Oh no, never, never." Well, I hope you're right, but I just wouldn't bet a lot of money on it, because they just endorsed a pro-gay translation of the Bible, a Catholic edition of the NRSV updated version. And you just had that Jubilee celebration that Pope Francis never did, but now the so-called more traditional Pope Leo has this LGBTQP Jubilee celebration in the Vatican. I think it's just a matter of time before they wind up talking themselves into saying, well, maybe St. Paul really didn't understand homosexuality like we do.
And to be fair, that's a salient critique, because look what they did, the death penalty. We have guys like, all these supposed trads like, Eric Ybarra and whatnot, and like, oh, well, maybe the death penalty is wrong. Like, they weren't saying this a few years ago, but they changed the tune. Because I hate to give like the Protestants credit for this, but the slur papists, usually slurs and stereotypes have some basis in reality. I mean, they're generally crude, but they have some basis in reality. And in the end of the day, it's a kind of papilolatry, right? It's as long as the Pope is right, everything else could be altered and changed and this and that. And it's kind of weird, honestly. Like, let's just say we're all wrong and atheism's right. This is just a theoretical. The point is, it just seems weird to be that obsessed with some guy that lives in Italy, that lives in a multi-million-dollar mansion, because that's essentially what, Vatican is, right? And to make it where he's the most important thing on earth. It's like an Egyptian pharaoh. It's just very strange. It's weird this would be taken seriously in the modern day.
Yeah, well, their entire church rises or falls on this question. And so for them, it's a make or break deal.
And for this is why you viewers should get Rise and Fall of the Papacy.
Right. An excellent book, which I've been meaning to write my review of, by the way, but I have finished it. It's an excellent book. I highly recommend it.
It's interesting because Father Theodore, he used to teach church history at Jordanville. He sent me an email the other day. He's like, "Oh, I made an Amazon review for your book." and I'm yet to see it. I really want to see this. I don't know if like it gets slower for it to filter out of the United Kingdom or something. But yes, I would love your review. I'd love to see it.
Yeah.
That's always a fun thing for a writer. We have Protestants like to accuse the early church of integrating Roman paganism, but reading the early saints blows that out of the water. What do you think about that, Father?
Well, I think that's just, if you're from the Protestant critique of Roman Catholicism, they have to say, well, it was pagan influence that got them into this weird stuff that clearly is a departure from the early church as Protestants see it. So they have to find some way to say, yeah, way back in the early church, they were just strumming guitars with four white walls and, praising Jesus, and then all of a sudden all these pagans came in, and pretty soon they were wearing vestments and worshiping idols and all that kind of stuff. But there's no evidence that that's the case.
It's interesting because when you start doing like this is like bell curve stuff, like so the beginning of the bell curve is like dirt, Christianity just came from Judaism. And then the middle of that bell curve is all the midwits saying like, oh yeah, it came from paganism, there's syncretism with, Roman society, with mass conversions after Constantine changed the ethos of the church. And then when you go to the top of that bell curve, where the genius, the glasses is, you're like, no, it really comes from Judaism. That's really where all this stuff comes from. And so like when you start doing this deep dive on a lot of the top tier history of really early Christianity and these Orthodox distinctives, you start coming with, oh yeah, energy essence distinction, that's in Philo, right? In Jewish philosophy, and and the whole symbolic ethos and Orthodox iconography that comes from Jewish cryptograms and stuff like this. And you start realizing that this is just what incarnational Judaism would look like. And if God were to bless me to write another book before I die, because I don't think another book's coming, even though there's two up there. I don't think there's another one coming. But if there were to be one, I'd want to do a serious history of first century Judaism for that reason, because it would look a lot more like Orthodox Christianity than people popularly think. And I'm very serious about that. So it's an interesting topic nonetheless. We have this, Father, vote of confidence. We're the best combo on YouTube. Look at that. If we were just YouTubers doing this for money, like we could do political opinions, like a radio show. We go, what do you think of Charlie Kirk? And stuff like that. that sort of stuff. It's always fun to have Father John on. And, I don't think I have you on enough, honestly. Just don't have the time. I think we're a great combo, Father. It's how was your show on Cleave to Antiquity? I saw only a little bit of it. How did you feel about the audience and everything? Is it a more Protestant audience?
I think it is, because that's who he was appealing to before, and I thought the show went very well. What's interesting is I have a catechumen in my parish that asked me about his channel, back when he was making videos attacking Orthodoxy, and I told her, well, I think he's probably going to wind up arguing his way into Orthodoxy by digging into it. It happened sooner than I was expecting it would actually work out. But that was my first thought, was the way he's digging into it, because he's not just doing the superficial arguments that most Protestants do, but he was actually digging into the source material. I thought, yeah, it's just a matter of time. And sure enough, that's what happened.
Yeah, in one of his videos about the Theotokos, he was making these sort of high-end arguments against St. Gregory of Palamas, and I was recognizing, oh, he must have got this from an article I wrote. And I messaged him like, oh, did he get this from my article? I was like, yes. And I was just pleased he was actually doing somewhat serious research, even if clearly something disagreed with. And I think God honored what was a correct intent, if that makes sense, right? Like, he had the correct intent, think the truth's on his side, and eventually, if that's your intent and you see the truth against you, you flip. We have someone here, and hope you enjoyed your time, Father Moses Parish. And God willing, I'll be back. My godson's there, so God willing, we will be back there. Yeah. And I want to be back in Houston, Father. It was fun going to your church too. What a lovely parish you have. Yeah. And there are some Orthodox abbots and bishops and priests that are vocal about accepting trans as okay and take communion, and meaning we got the libs in Orthodoxy too. And being this is Orthodox confessions, I do want to confess coming from a conservative Reformed Baptist church, and before that with my wife, who was here just a moment ago, a conservative PCA, which is a Presbyterian church, before I converted to Orthodoxy. In some respects, like OCA, Greek churches, they're more liberal than conservative Protestants, and that can be kind of off-putting. And so, like, for you, did you run into that, or was that a difficulty for you? How do you grapple even with that now that there's these liberal elements within Orthodoxy?
Back when I was digging into Orthodoxy in 1990, I didn't get the impression that there was anything as like liberal Orthodoxy. I know that now there was, at least on some level, but the Orthodox liberals back then were still pretty conservative by almost every other measure. I don't think I would have been able to find anybody who would have openly said, yeah, maybe homosexuality is not all, so bad, or, maybe we just haven't understood St. Paul, or maybe St. Paul misunderstood it. There was just nobody talking that way. But you do have some people talking that way. But the big difference between Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism is just that you've got their central authority that's talking that way, and so there's nobody who can challenge it. Whereas in
Yeah.
Orthodoxy, you can always have a bishop or even a local church that goes off the rails on a subject, but the rest of the church can say you're crazy, and eventually they either get corrected, or you could wind up having a schism. But the whole church is not going to embrace it. But when you've got the Vatican, when you've got the papal model, and the Vatican starts promoting homosexuality, there's nobody to challenge it, and they have the ability to enforce it and make everybody else like it.
Yeah, I mean, the Roman Catholic apologists, ultimately, if they're going to try to bark up that tree, it's very self-defeating for them, because sadly for them, they've made more outrageous claims about like what they expect from their Pope of Rome compared to what we expect to our patriarchs and synods, right? The Sixth Ecumenical Council took two synods, Constantinople and Antioch, and reconciled them to the Orthodox teaching of the church, right? So
Right.
like we have elements of history where lots of the church are wrong, and that's part of our history. We're okay with it,
Right.
right? I mean, that's something that could occur. Protestants too, in the end of the day, they could have all sorts of problems. It's that they don't have a system that requires a dogmatic perfection for a particular individual. And so for Roman Catholics, they've kind of backed themselves into that corner, and it's sort of difficult to back out of it. I think most academics already did. I think most serious Roman Catholic academics don't believe in papal infallibility and things like this. When that will become official for them, I don't know. I'm not going to anticipate the future. I have this question: do you have more stuff planned to Subdeacon Daniel? Hopefully, recent events have not affected things. Things resolved in the end, and I mean, sure, yeah, there'll be stuff. I'll touch on Christology and certain things, but I don't anticipate with Egan there until maybe he's young yet, so he might get older in like 5 years from now, which he'll still be young. He'll be 25 in 5 years, and he might be like, "Oh yeah, that was a little silly," or something like that. No, I'm fine with Subdeacon Daniel. There's no issues there, and so people shouldn't to read too into that. I will say this though, and maybe Father John, you could comment on this broader issue. If people are getting very emotional and divisive, it's just not spiritually good to be interacting with those people in real life or online. And generally speaking, they're not very good sources of information because they're getting so emotional about it. And so, Father, you've been around the block and in apologetics for many years and been dealing with crazies on the internet since the 90s. So I'm interested in your insight about that issue, and whether was that even a thing when you were Protestant becoming Orthodox, and as an Orthodox Christian in the beginning, just dealing with crazy on the internet and that sort of spirit of divisiveness.
Well, there was no internet back when I became Orthodox, so that kind of stuff didn't exist. But I mean, there was, you had Orthodox figures that people knew about, and so I remember coming to hear about, say, Lev Puhalo, for example, who was no fan of Father Seraphim Rose, and they had their back and forth that was conducted via publications, and he's still around. But I remember discovering who he was and why he was kind of an oddball. Uh, so that kind of stuff, you could find out about those kinds of controversies. You could read about them sometimes in Orthodox publications, but it was nothing like today where you could have, some controversy work itself out in a couple of days. Where someone, has some big spat with somebody else, and then it becomes a big mess, and maybe even gets resolved on some level with, before a week is out. That just wasn't even possible prior to the internet.
Well, I got a Protestant confession because that is the title of this show, which is, I have to say, not being that involved in apologetics and in just generally in the Protestant world, I did not deal with the level of spiritual warfare on all sorts of levels that I would deal with in Orthodoxy. And
Yeah.
in general, I've noticed when people get angry, whether Roman Catholics and Orthodox, they get angry in a much harder, vindictive way.
Right.
And the holy people I've run into are far holier than the people I've seen in Protestantism. So the
Right.
extremes are more extreme, I've noticed. And so that's something that could, really shake some people. And I think that's kind of the point of the spiritual warfare, right? Is like Satan wants to get you off your game. And that's why the church prescribes a sort of spiritual disciplines to try to at least help give you the strength, to deal with it on game day, which for the Christians, every day you wake up,
Yeah.
it's game day. Another Protestant confession I want to make back to the prayer book is the fact there's a prayer book.
Right.
When I'm a Protestant, I can just go and pray, right? And then you're like, oh no, here are your prayers. Do this. And I just remember first, I didn't even know there's such thing as prayer books when I first started becoming Orthodox. It's just sort of weird. I pray from a book. It's like, why do I need a
And the
book?
cracy thing is the
And
biggest book of the Bible is a prayer book, and you just never think about that as a
yeah,
Protestant.
the book of Psalms, the and the longest chapter of the Bible, right?
Right.
Psalm 119. But it's the interesting thing I realized right off the bat was I already had my own internal prayer book. My style of prayer was very, very rote. The things were the same. My praise to God was the same. And so, and the things, what are those called? The petitions I was making was the same. And so I realized prayer book is just kind of like the saint giving the same stuff instead of you
Right.
giving the same stuff. And I've also found that the prayer rules conform your heart to prayer, they conform your mindset, and they give you better words to pray when you're praying in your own words.
Right.
And they increase your time in prayer. So, like, I would have Protestants ask me in the beginning, like, well, how do you pray to the saints? It takes away praying to God. And I said, well, if you're praying 40 minutes to an hour a day, you can make time for some saints, right? Compared to
Right.
Protestantism, you might have just a very quick prayer. Now, that's low, that's low Protestantism. Some people wear, like, even somewhat conservative Lutherans, they've got morning prayers, evening prayers, meal prayers. So it's not like Protestants don't have these things too, right? And the Roman Catholics have these things. But so
Right.
just it was an adjustment for me amongst my Protestant confessions. I mean, how about you, Father? Because what was someone asked, like, weren't you Wesleyan? What was your
Right.
exact background? And so, like, what was their whole approach to prayer compared to what you had to conform yourself to as an Orthodox Christian?
Well, the version of Wesleyanism that I grew up in was, not at all high church, or anything like that. So the idea of reading a prayer was not something that we typically did. Although I do remember as a kid us doing responsive readings and services, and I at a certain point stopped seeing that being done, and I'm not quite sure why. But that gets a little bit more like something liturgical when you do those responsive readings. Um, but you know, I remember when I was still a Protestant, wasn't thinking about Orthodoxy, buying a book of Common Prayer and thinking it was kind of interesting. But I didn't buy the old Book of Common Prayer. It was whatever the current or Episcopalian was at the time. So I didn't actually use it, but I thought it was interesting. But when I became Orthodox, by the time I got to that point, I'd learned enough about liturgical worship where I just didn't see it as a problem. Right now in my parish, we're doing a Bible study on the Book of Leviticus, which is, kind of. I took it on as a challenge just because it's not the most easily read book of the Bible. So one of those books of the Bible that stop most people from making their way entirely through the Bible from cover to cover.
Mhm.
But when you start digging into the worship that's described in the Book of Leviticus, it's hard to come away from that thinking, well, spontaneous worship was the biblical worship, because that's not what you find described in the Old Testament. And you can say, well, that's the Old Testament. Well, the thing is, why would you think that for a couple thousand years God was encouraging people to worship in a liturgical way, and then when the New Testament comes about, that we would suddenly just say, well, that's a bunch of crap, let's just strum guitars and have four white walls and do whatever comes to our mind, randomly. That's just, why would you think that? It's certainly not historically what you see when you look at early church history.
You get at a good point there, which is that the kind of what we consider spontaneous and more authentic is culturally conditioned by what's considered authentic today. In the past, they would have not taken those things for granted. And I think a lot of objections people have are things that are grounded in just what they're used to due to where they're from and how things are now, and not really grounded in how people would have perceived the same things for most of history. We have this from Mimi. Father John, when can I start reading the Philokalia? I was just baptized, but I'd read almost everything has been recommended by you. So I would say right away. I mean, what do you think?
Well, it wouldn't be the first thing that I would recommend somebody read, because there are certainly parts of the Philokalia that are easy to understand, and then there are some parts that get into more complicated stuff. So I typically recommend people read things that are more accessible, like The Arena by St. Ignatiy Brunchaninov. It would be the first book on the spiritual life that I would recommend most people read. But no reason not to read it eventually. So I mean, I think if you got a copy and you started reading through it and you found it spiritually beneficial, there wouldn't be any reason to stop. But you might hit some spots that seem a little over your head, and if that happens, you might want to set it down for a while and come back to it later.
Yeah, I would say it's not a matter of like, oh, just giving people baby food, but there's certain things like if you haven't read the whole Bible, I'll use a simple example. You shouldn't be jumping into major theology, which some people do on Twitter and stuff, which is
Right.
kind of nauseates me. If you haven't read the whole prologue of Oak Reed, right? It's like, why would you be jumping to these more serious, dense theological works? I mean, like, this is just the beginning to understand the hagiographic
Right.
witness for church, which is super important, right? It's like you kind of need those things like the scriptures. If you're not following a prayer rule, why are you jumping into all this theological debates? Right? You wouldn't have, it's like you don't want to make everything like, oh, without the phronema, you can't understand anything. But there is something to phronema to get started, right? You should be following the prayer rules and reading the
Right.
saints' lives. That's just the basics. It's just like, I wouldn't want you taking the motor apart in my car if you've never done an oil change.
Right.
It's basic in that sense. We have Father. I have a friend who is non-denominational. One of his main hangups is his perceived lack of Orthodox missionary witness out in the world opposed to online ministry. How can I navigate explaining away the Orthodox seeming lack of outward mission if we are the true church? Where was the church before modernity? So I've got lots of comments. I do missionary work, but Father, how about you first?
Well, I think that the Orthodox have been engaged in missionary work since the time of Christ. It's just that the way an evangelical tends to think of missionary work in America is going door to door, and trying to get people to come to your church. But the reason why the Orthodox haven't typically done that in the United States is, if you're a Jehovah's Witness or you're a United Pentecostal or you're a Southern Baptist, you could knock on the average door of an American and you could speak, your own theological language, and most people are going to know what you're talking about. There might be aspects of it that they're not going to get because they come from a different background. But for the most part, you're not going to have to give a lot of fundamental explanations about what it is that you're trying to say. Whereas if the Orthodox went door to door in the average, neighborhood in the Houston area, we would spend like the first 30 minutes just giving even the most basic outlines of who we were and how we were different from Roman Catholics and stuff like that. And so we wouldn't be even getting into the four spiritual laws of Orthodoxy or anything like that, because it would just take so long to lay the groundwork. But the way we actually do missionary work is, we have content that's online. Basically, we're in a digital age now, and people are finding out about Orthodoxy. They're watching videos that explain what Orthodoxy is all about, and then by the time someone has maybe spent 6 months or a year going through that kind of stuff, they'll show up at my church and say, "Hey, I want to become Orthodox. What do I need to do?" So, it's kind of like it's happening out there, and then it's coming to a parish near you. And so it's not so much the individual efforts of the parish as much as just making sure people know how to find where they're at, and then reaping the harvest of many people's labors online.
Now, I think I have two answers to the question, like why isn't there more Orthodox missions historically and in the present day? First, I would object to the first premise historically. There's Orthodox missions all the way up into the Russian Revolution, and they followed the mold of all historical missions that were pretty much the 1800s, pre-American. So let me say this first. People think that missionary work only looks like how Americans do missions, and they go, "Oh, you don't do it the American way, therefore you don't do missions." But Christianity existed for a good long while before America existed and the American style of missionary work. So that's one thing we have to get through our heads. Most historical missions were converting royalty over time. That's just reality. Latin America became Roman Catholic because the Peninsulares were the established royalty in Latin America. And if you wanted to be in the Spanish civil service, you wanted to be in the army and have what they considered good jobs, you had to convert to Roman Catholicism. It wasn't like they were love bombing people and hugging people and they became Christians. It was a long top down approach, which was successful. And I praise God for approaches that are successful. The Rus was converted this way. Ultimately, the Roman Empire was converted this way. This was, let's take a more modern example, the Philippines. Again, you have to join the Spanish civil service, you had to become Roman Catholic. The Roman Catholic Church is who controlled the schools, and the people that were getting educated were the people that end up being movers and shakers in that society, and they became Christians, and it was a top-down approach to missions. While the Jehovah's Witness, the general speaking, the American Protestant approach is very much in line with capitalism. Market exposure, get to everyone, bottom to the top, right? People are doing this on the streets, you're behind on the times. And that's not bad. I'm not even trying to denigrate it. I'm just trying to point out the historical discongruity between what we've had for almost 1800 years and what we have today. Like when we see in the scriptures, a lot of the converts that are being made by St. Paul, right? He's converting people that are the heads of synagogues. He's converting people that are treasurers of cities. Yes, there are also slaves and stuff converted, but we see it's not what people have popularly thought. That's just the rabble that were becoming Christians. A book by T.C. Schmidt on the historicity of the that part of Josephus' Antiquities about Christ. He gets into the history of who knew Jesus and who these people are connected to, and you start realizing that a lot of these, even the apostles, were much more integrated with the elites than you would imagine. Remember in the Gospel of John, Saint John is known to the high priest. So, and as we well know, in even secular history, Saint James, the greater, was killed at the temple. What's he doing at the temple if he wasn't known to the people running the temple? So these are things where our modern view of missionary work is oftentimes ahistorical. And the Russians, up until the Russian Revolution, when then it became a mass persecution where I would say tens of millions of Christians were killed by that persecution, were evangelizing the Russian Far East, and they were missionizing Alaska, Japan. So you can't say they weren't doing missions. They were doing missions as long as they're free to. Now, after the Russian Revolution, you start seeing the shoe on the other foot. Greek Orthodox, no longer under the Ottomans, are starting to missionize Africa, and Greek Orthodox in the United States are helping financially support a lot of this. But there's a lot less of them than there were of Russians, and a lot less money involved when you used to have governments paying for these things. And so let's go to the 21st century. Do Orthodox missions exist? Yes. That's what I've even been scrolling on screen. We have an Orthodox mission in Cambodia. And of course, we want your support, not just financially, but pray to become a missionary yourself. So there is missionary work. Just expect that the historical presuppositions your friend who's non-denominational may be making are wrong. And that being said, in the modern era, are people that are doing it the American way ahead than, let's say, people doing it the historical way? Yes, they started first. Is it going to be like that forever? I very much doubt it. So that's just something for people to keep in mind anyway.
Well, also in the 20th century, we had a lot of involuntary missionaries because you had a huge dispersion of Greeks and a huge dispersion of Russians all over the globe. And I think that was God's providence. Just like, before Christ came and the church began to spread, you had a dispersion of Jews all over the world that made that possible. I think God in his providence has made it possible for Orthodoxy to spread like wildfire by first getting Orthodox people into countries and establishing parishes so that when people started getting interested in Orthodoxy, they had an infrastructure to attach themselves to.
And that's also very historical, by the way. The churches in Kerala, India, the churches in Ethiopia were started by Christian merchants that when they're out in business would have somewhere to worship. And then the mission expands to the local people from the essentially ancient version of expats with established parishes. And that's really how Cambodia is starting. There's these Russian expats mostly. There's some other ethnicities. But it starts with them, and then it expands out to the Cambodian people. And the Cambodians are happy when they outnumber the Russians on some Sundays. So there you go. We have this comment, which is kind of on the note. Charles says, I feel like Orthodox parishes in America, having been isolated by their cultural identity, was providential for God to protect them from modernism of the West. And now the scales are falling off for many. And I think there's something to be said there, because really the more American they get, the less Orthodox they get. It's not every Greek Orthodox parish, but you'd be hard pressed with certain Greek Orthodox parishes to see the difference between that and a Lutheran, Episcopalian, and Roman Catholic parish, because it starts becoming so visually similar. The ethos becomes so similar. Now there's differences, which I think are good on our side, but there's something to be said about God's providence, and for a period of time there being a sort of inward looking proclivity for some time, because we've had modernism has destroyed the West. And I think that's what the attraction of orthodoxy is right now, is people looking at the decadence of the West and looking for something permanent, unchanging, pure. And hence it's become missionary. Not being missionary in the West in some respects has become missionary now. And it's one of those things where the scriptures say maybe what you intended for evil, God meant for good. So maybe
Yeah.
people looking inward wasn't good, but we can now see God's providence in
Right.
some circles allowing that. We have this, Father. Could you please explain if Anabaptists ever tried to reach out to the Orthodox East during the Reformation? Why did they stray farther than Lutheran theology? Do you have any inkling on that one, Father?
There may be some writings on that subject, but I'd not come across any that really get into that. What's interesting is you did have a lot of Anabaptists that wound up in the Russian Empire, so obviously they did encounter Orthodoxy. I've just not read much about what came of that, but Anabaptist communities have long tended to be somewhat insular, and particularly when you had the language barrier on top of the big theological differences, that might have just caused them to feel like they needed to keep to their own or something like that. But I, there, like I said, there's probably something out there that I'm just not aware of, I would think.
And we got this question. My Oriental friends said this to me. If you want to learn about Roman Catholicism, you read Aquinas. Eastern Orthodoxy, you read Gregory Palamas. Oriental Orthodoxy, you read Cyril of Alexandria, basically arguing they teach the Father. So I guess the question is this true? And my answer, Father, and I'll be brief, is in reality, you got to read at least Severus of Antioch, because a lot of the things they think are Cyrillian are really Severian and not explicitly Cyrillian.
Right. Right.
And so, and a lot of things like, we could say, all right, we could take someone for this, read St. Ambrose of Milan, a saint we all accept. And who's he sound closest to? And then you're going to find it's not Roman Catholicism, it's not Oriental Orthodoxy, it's Eastern Orthodoxy. So it's one of those falsely framed things on purpose. That's my comment. I don't know about yours, Father.
Yeah, I mean, when I think of Saint Cyril of Alexandria, I don't think of Monophysitism. He came to agreements with Saint John of Antioch, in which he found the phraseology of speaking of Christ with two natures being completely acceptable. It was the people who rejected what Saint Cyril was saying that wound up as the Monophysites.
We're going to have a show in a couple weeks, so people are interested. It's really not so much apologetics is like this other side's wrong, but this is going to be actual apologetics. It's going to be this explaining something. There's an interesting video by Metropolitan Bishoy, who was one of the Copt bishops that were integral in the ecumenical discussions between the Oriental Orthodox and Eastern Orthodox. And he makes some very interesting statements, such as confessing two continuing natures after the incarnation and continuing wills. And so you start seeing, oh, well, there's Oriental Orthodox bishops that are willing now to concede at least that conceptually the Chalcedonian theology is not Nestorian. Doesn't mean they don't have certain differences of opinion. Right. But it's something to bring out, like, yeah, it's like when people argue on the internet, you think there's this big difference on that. And then you start realizing, no, the conceptual theology is very similar. The differences are in theological vocabulary and what the potential ramifications of those are. And I think that's the most charitable way I could put it. We have on the road to conversion from conservative Baptist tradition. Hearing a progressive liberal ounce by Eastern Orthodox clergy is worrisome. Will you please revisit that conversation? And I guess what he's saying is, it worries me as a conservative Baptist that there might be flaming libs in Orthodoxy. I'd say you just got to know it's out there, right? It's in some respects, there's a big church, right? Eastern Orthodoxy's got hundreds of millions of adherents. You got to expect there's going to be more crazies versus you take something small, a schism of a schism of a schism of a schism that filters out all that stuff. It leaves less room for that, if that makes sense. And this is America. You could, I suppose, vote with your feet and just, my spiritual father says you pick the best parish for you and your family. None of us believe that your local parish priest is infallible, although if his name is Father John Whiteford, right? So other than that, you're not going to have the luck of, that knowing for sure whoever is the head of that parish is going to be correct on all matters. I don't know if you have something to add to that, Father.
Well, when you talk about progressivism, there's I think even in the Orthodox Church, when you see priests, particularly when you're coming out as a convert, you might think that if you see a priest who's wearing a Roman collar and he's clean shaven, that he's some sort of a theological liberal. And I've personally, as I've gotten to know priests that were from other jurisdictions, I've met priests that fit that description outside, but they were very traditionally minded. If you're coming at it from like an old school Antiochian perspective, they bought into the idea that, yeah, clergy ought to look like other clergy in this country, so wearing a Roman collar is okay. But when you start talking about is orthodoxy the truth or not, you don't get them saying, well, maybe, maybe not, or maybe the Roman Catholics are want another lung in the body of Christ. I mean, there certainly are people who say crazy things like that you can find, but I don't think that that's something that you're likely to find in most parish situations. They're here and there, and unfortunately, some bishops allow clergy like that to get away with saying stupid stuff, but usually they do have to at least maintain plausible deniability and kind of get mealy mouthed to be able to get away with some of the things that they say. And the liberals that we have would be conservatives in most Protestant denominations.
That's worth pointing out. And we've already seen a reversal. I think liberalism and orthodoxy has already hit its apex. So it's not like where it's going to go more down the cliff, like sadly for the Baptists, for the Roman Catholics, I think both of those will eventually have somewhat of a correction into a better direction, but they still got some more to go down. But it already appears it started reversing itself within orthodoxy, which is a good thing.
But if you take the Greek Archdiocese, for example, there is a generation of clergy that tend to be more liberal, although I don't think even there it's the majority. Mm-hmm. But if you look at the younger priests that are coming out of the seminaries and stuff like that, they're almost all Ephraimite types. That they're very traditionally minded. That they're dressing traditional. They look traditional. They want traditional services, and I think that tells you something. Now, I think people have seen.
I think by the time I'm old, the organ's going to be gone.
Right.
You know what I mean? In the Greek church, and I don't think that's an outrageous opinion, which shows you people are kind of aware that it's correcting itself.
Right.
We have thoughts on the apostolic constitutions. What is the church's view of this work? Is it apostolic? It's known to be edifying. It's in the longer canon of St. John of Damascus. It's mentioned, I think, I forget which council, in the Council of Trullo. But no, I don't think it's historically from the apostles. It's almost like hagiographically ascribed to them, but not precisely.
I think the same
apostolic elements in it. Yes, like the dedication.
I think that it's Canon 2 of the Council of Trullo that talks about it and basically says that it has been corrupted essentially, and
which it has, right? There's interpolations in it. There's parts that Didache, which is apostolic, and there's just other stuff added to it. Right.
So I got into that question because I had someone who was quoting from the apostolic constitutions as if it definitively proved a point, and then I was able to see, well, canonically, it's just not. It's the canons themselves state that it's not something that you can rely on. It doesn't mean it wouldn't be worth reading it, but you would need to read it with the awareness that there's corrupted elements in it.
Let me ask you this, Father. You came from the Wesleyan tradition, so you're probably not bothered at all by the sort of very free will approach, which is called in Protestantism Arminianism, that Orthodoxy ascribes to in their soteriology. I came from Calvinism, so at first to me it was very jarring. The sort of Orthodox approach to soteriology. And so for me, it was a matter of really learning more theology and start seeing how synergy really worked and why that was the correct understanding of soteriology. But like for Protestants, you don't think if someone's Arminian that sends them to hell. So like it was never like a make or break issue for me. I'm wondering if did you find that the soteriology of Orthodoxy was very similar to the background you had, or there were certain tinkerings you had to make the transition?
I mean, obviously, what I'd been taught wasn't complete, but the elements that a lot of Protestants get hung up on, like the ones that you mentioned, didn't cause that reaction in my case, because I grew up believing that people had free will. I knew what synergy was before I read anything about Orthodoxy to speak of. So when I started digging into Orthodoxy, it all made perfect sense on those subjects.
So, guys, this is your last opportunity for questions, because we're gonna wrap it up in a few minutes. So, just last opportunity for questions. We have this for you, Father. What gaps did Marius Theotokos fill in for you as an Eastern Orthodox that was missing for you when you were Protestant?
Well, I mean, the saints in general, but especially the Theotokos, filled in a lot of gaps because this idea of having a connection with the church that's in heaven is something that's totally missing in Orthodoxy. Whereas in the Orthodox Church, the idea that we're literally surrounded by a cloud of witnesses, it becomes a very tangible reality in the Orthodox Church. We depict it in the iconography we have on the walls of our churches, but it's a spiritual reality too.
Yeah, St. John of Kronstadt says, that we should pray and reflect and know we're being surrounded by God and the saints and the angels. And so what's, I guess, missing is that community and that feeling of, your community here on earth is people in your parish or your congregation, your Protestant, that you love. But just knowing that extends into heaven, like the martyrs in the book of Revelation. And I think that's the real difference, is knowing it extends into heaven. We have, what are your thoughts on the ancient Church of the East? No one really talks about them. Are they really Nestorian? Because Roman Catholics have been saying we have misunderstood them. You got any opinions, Father?
Well, the Roman Catholics are willing to accept any of those groups as long as they bow the knee to the Pope. So, surely they're going to say that was all big misunderstanding. But, I read quite a bit about the Church of the East because I was dealing with someone who was considering becoming Orthodox. And for a while, they were digging into that group, partly because they thought that the Church of the East rejected iconography. And they kind of thought, well, hey, I can have my cake and eat it too, become a Nestorian, and I'll still have all this ancient connection with the church and liturgical worship and stuff like that, but I don't have to venerate icons. And the thing is, I was able to show them that, yeah, as a matter of fact, the Nestorians do have iconography. It's not some Protestant bastion in church history like he was trying to make it out to be.
And for those kind of interested in that topic, there was in the far east of the Nestorian Church, because there's east and west of Syria, so to say. There was a falling out beginning the 8th century of the belief of the saints being alive in heaven. They started believing in soul sleep. It's kind of, and that led to some weirdness with, obviously, how do you venerate a saint that is not going to answer your prayers because of soul sleep? So that was even an issue that some of the Portuguese missionaries ran into in Kerala in India. They go, they don't have icons as we understand it, and things like that, or for them to be statues. And I think a lot of this has to do with soul sleep doctrine in some quarters. And for anyone that reads ancient church history and just looks at the vast preponderance of Christendom, you could realize this is an aberration in a small corner somewhere that's really not that relevant. Otherwise,
one thing that's interesting about the Nestorians and iconography is that Nestorian missionaries went all the way into China, and Nestorian iconography actually influenced Chinese Buddhist iconography because they had icons of the Virgin Mary, and archaeologists have discovered some of these shrines that the Nestorians established, and were able to link the development of the iconography of Guanyin to the icon of the Mother of God. So it's the opposite of what Jack Chick would like to say, which is that the Christians were copying the pagans. In this case, the Buddhists were copying the Christians.
It's a known fact that the halo in Buddhist iconography comes from the Greeks, and the somewhat later there's this like kind of female Buddha. I don't know her name. Maybe you mentioned, and I see it a
It's
lot with,
Guan Yin, because
I see yeah,
the
it's like
Guan Yin in Chinese Buddhism is the Bodhisattva, which is the merciful emanation of Buddha. And in every other form of Buddhism, the Bodhisattva is depicted as a man, but it wound up being depicted as a woman holding a child in Chinese Buddhism because of influence from Nestorians.
yeah, the Vietnamese have like this Chinese Buddha, this female Buddha thing,
Yeah,
and so yeah, it shows you that they copied this from what must have been something pre-existing because it's
yeah.
not from original Buddhism. Whether their Christology is the same or not, I really don't fully know, but this I do know absolutely certain. Is Nestorius himself, if you read what he wrote, clearly is wrong and not misunderstood. He's
Right.
clearly not misunderstood. They venerate him as a saint, so I just don't see how that could be an acceptable option. So I just leave it at that.
They're
We
also a
have for
very
Father
small
John,
group
what is
relative
grace
to the
and do
rest of the
heretical
church.
groups?
Sorry about that.
Yeah, they almost don't exist. If there's only
Right,
like a
right,
million on earth, it's
right.
really not that consequential. Um, what is grace? All right, this is a very qualified question. And do heretical groups have grace in their sacraments? And if so, how?
What is grace, and what was the rest of that?
And do heretical groups have grace in their sacraments?
Well, the thing is the way I would put it is that non-Orthodox people don't have sacramental grace, but everybody has grace on some level because God is merciful to everyone. Christ is the true light that lightens every man that comes into the world. So I would describe grace as the activity of the Holy Spirit that's drawing people to Himself in the world. But sacramental grace is not the same thing as just God's grace in some sort of a like prevenient grace sense of the term. And the key thing is, if you talk about baptism, for an example, baptism is entry into the church. When you're baptized, you become a member of the church. If we believe that Protestants had sacramental grace when they baptized people, that means that they had already been members of the church, and we wouldn't have to worry about how to receive them into the church.
Yeah, there's a Orthodox prayer, "Oh Heavenly King, Comforter, Spirit, Truth, art everywhere, and fill us all things." Right? So
Right.
God's grace is everywhere and sustains everything. And apart from that grace, everything would corrupt and essentially approach annihilation.
Right.
And so, yes, everything has grace in that respect. But when people mean grace, like, is it salvific? And the answer would be normatively no, because these are not actual sacraments in the Orthodox Church. There's a divorce in charity, often a divorce in proper form and intent. So there's major problems there. Though, is it good that people are trying to do the right thing and trying to get closer to God? That's always
Yeah.
good, no matter the context. It's better than purposely not doing those things. So I think I think the major problem when people look at some exceptional dispensation, like the vesting of uniates, for example, right? They let in people wholesale, even clergy and things like this. Historically, this occurred with novations in the first millennium. And they look, oh, these are things that can be done. So it should be done for this very different situation. We'll just use an example for Baptists that baptize in the name of Christ, single immersion. Is that acceptable is the question, right? And this is where you have to let the canons and those who are in the church, the bishops, discern these things and not be stamping our feet. But look, there's this other analogous example, and that must mean it's right. And that must mean they already have baptism and grace and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
And so that's why we talk about what's normative versus what's extraordinary. And I think maybe what would be more useful in these conversations, it would be to start with like that prayer to the Holy Spirit. It's like, yeah, His grace, it fills all things. So then by that logic, does that mean Muslims have this salvific grace? No, that's not what we mean, right? Of course we don't mean that. And so then that way we could discuss this in the realm of where it needs to be discussed: proper
Right.
baptismal theology, proper Eucharistic theology, etc. But let me add one thing that's worth people considering, and it's something which may be interesting. I'll give people an update on this. There's going to be I don't want to give up the spirit on this. I will say this: the Oriental Orthodox doctrine of baptismal reception is like the conservative Athonite, the Rocor. It's just like that approach to baptism. All
Right.
The conservative canonical approach. So all the people that say, oh, this is some new fundamentalist Protestant convert way of interpreting the canons or something, let me just respond to that with this. If that were to be true, how do you explain there's this group not touched by Protestant fundamentalism doing it exactly this way with this exact interpretation of the canons and events before the year 500 and doing
Right.
that for 1500 years? You kind of can't use the slur, oh, these are Protestant converts with a fundamentalist approach to canonical things. You start wondering, well, maybe there's a way the traditionalists read the canons and these Oriental Orthodox read the canons, and how St. Nicodemus read the canons versus how people since the 1800s and modernity have
Right.
changed reading the canons. It's not like we haven't had councils like in Constantinople in the 1750s on this question. So something for people to think about. I'm not very divisive on this baptism question. I feel that there's more room than people think on this, but the canonical conservative Akrivia view is never wrong. It cannot be by definition. We got this last question before we call it a day, Father. What do you make of Marian apparitions in Roman Catholicism and Orthodoxy? She seems to be real in both, I think is what he's saying.
Well, we don't make judgments about things that go on outside of the church. And so, did the Virgin Mary appear to, what was it, Juan Diego, and with put and print an image on his shroud or his cape or whatever like that, and make Our Lady of Guadalupe's image? I wouldn't say that that's an impossibility, but when you have apparitions where heretical things are being stated by supposedly the Virgin Mary, I think at that point you have to start saying that this is at least not, these statements are not orthodox, so perhaps the apparitions got something else behind it altogether. But I don't think that we have to make a definitive judgment about it, because, who knows, what God might be doing in one case or another, but we can say this is either true or not true in terms of theology.
Now, I have a Protestant confession, which is when I first started hearing about this stuff, it was very weird and bizarre to me, right? Like theology didn't stand or fall based on like the appearance of some alleged saint or something as a Protestant, right?
Right.
And certainly we didn't have such stuff to report on within Protestantism. And so it was just totally irrelevant. It just seemed like kind of these fairy tales being made up when I heard about this. And something I learned as an Orthodox Christian, and especially over the years, is that we're not looking for miracles under every rock and every left and right. The presumption needs to be that if I think something miraculous is happening, that I'm being deceived, there's something wrong. I need to speak to my spiritual father about this.
Right.
That we need to doubt ourselves and our own holiness and presume that we could be easily deceived by spiritual things. The Orthodox ethos is, generally speaking, that these appearances could only occur with tremendous spiritual preparation, and they only true angelic and saintly apparitions, or the Lord himself, to those who could attain to theosis and are spiritually prepared. And not that there's no example where like a saint or an angel will like shake someone out of the stupor, so to say, right? Because that was the means they needed. But the more elaborate and specific apparitions tend to be connected to the spiritual preparation and ascetic preparations of saints, which is very different when you get in Roman Catholicism, where the saints are essentially doing magic shows and spectacles. Like, right, there's no real preparation involved. They're they're doing almost this shtick, and it gets people's attention. And this is not something that is really hagiographically,
Right.
doesn't exist hagiographically and in the Orthodox tradition. So tomorrow is the vigil. Tuesday will be the commemoration of the protection, the Theotokos, and this is a liturgically commemorated apparition of the Theotokos in Constantinople. And this is useful for Orthodox Christians, which is, if the miracle's liturgically commemorated, we accept it. If it's not liturgically commemorated, we hold some skepticism, at least, because it hasn't reached the point where the consensus of Christians within the church recognize there's something real going on here. And so maybe this reminds me of Father Moses' church. His church is named after that Hawaiian icon, which is miracle working. The fact that the synod allows a church named after that icon, isn't that an official sanction because it has a feast day? That's a real miracle, as far as I'm aware. Like, would that be a sanction?
Yeah, that icon is commemorated on the calendar.
So, it's just like the older icons. The calendar I look at is Moscow Patriarchate, so I don't think it's on that calendar. I might be wrong. I don't remember seeing it. But depending on your synod's calendar, if you have the Jordanville calendar, let's say, you will see, this miracle we accept, or this miracle working icon we accept, because it's liturgically commemorated. So you don't have to wonder whether you could take it to the bank or not if you're an Orthodox Christian, to see if it's liturgically commemorated. So there's your cheat code if you need one. And if it's not liturgically commemorated, maybe there's something happening, but maybe there isn't, or maybe there's dark going on. And that should be your key to discernment on this. The church gives us the synods and the bishops and the hagiographies to help clear these things up for us, I feel. So, Father, before we call it a night, I want to give you an opportunity to plug what you're up to online, your blog, and because I feel it's been really beneficial for people in the online world to find their way into your church. So please plug away.
Well, I have my blog, which is at Father John, spelled out Father John at .blogspot.com. Parish website is Saint spelled out Jonah.org. And I have a Substack that I've created, and I've started cross-posting blog posts on there, but I need to write more so I can post more. It's just I thought I was going to be done with the pastoral school this year, and it turns out that I'm not, although I've got someone who's helping me with the class, and the plan is for them to take it over next year. But so that's still occupying some of my time.
I'm sure they'll drag you in deeper.
Well, I'm hoping that I can finally be done with it, just because I've got too many things going on. It's hard for me. That's one of the reasons why, if you look at my blog, I've written like 3 articles this year. And
that beats me, Father. I haven't written an article since last November.
Yeah. So it's just been difficult because of, the thought occurred to me yesterday that I should probably start tallying how many text messages I get in a day, just so I can give people an average and maybe inspire them to think twice before they start texting me about something, because it's hard to keep track of it.
You know what Father Moses said? He's like, our feast day is Monday. It's like, so my off day is going to be Tuesday. So, gals, if your husband's really going to try to fight with you on Tuesday, and you really got to call me up to try to diffuse this thing, just tell him, listen, let's just argue tomorrow. Father Moses is off today. and so, like, the point I'd walk away with a little quip like that is, being a parish priest makes you busy, especially in a growing parish like yours, like his, and that's why I want people. Please go to Father John's blog. Please, right now, stop everything that you're doing. Linked below. Click on the info to this. Now, stop. Click on info. You're going to see a link to the St. Jonah's YouTube page. All right. Click subscribe. Click on it now. Go to another tab, because you still got to hear me. Click on the other tab. Okay. Not that complicated. Click subscribe. Help Father John's YouTube channel for his services. Follow him there. So important. And you've got over 1,000 subs now, so we already brought you over the hump, but we'll help you go further, John.
It doesn't hurt to get higher. Yes.
It never hurts. Never hurts. It's for those who want to, if this has blessed you, if you want to bless me, I don't need your blessings, but the church in Cambodia sure does. You could go to orthodoxchristiantheology.com/donate. PayPal, Patreon, and Venmo is below. Monthly contributors are very much appreciated to help make a standard budget for things in Cambodia for missionary work, where we pay for the translations of saint lives, for a van, for the mission to one of the provinces in order to bring converts in. We are already having a couple missionaries that want to go to Cambodia and continue the English class after my wife and I. So I want to encourage people to discern missionary work and helping pay the bills for some of these missionaries who dig into their own pockets to pay for these things. Because I want to remind people something very important. And don't run, hon, because we can have you say goodbye in just a minute. Anyone who believes but is not a missionary has not yet known the beauty of faith. So you like theology, you're arguing about it on Twitter, you're getting into this stuff, but you are not reaching out to people with that love, then where's this love? So support the missionary work, do missionary work in your city, do missionary work overseas. One way you can do this, supporting the Orthodox Mission Cambodia, orthodoxchristiantheology.com/donate, or if you want to do the missionary work yourself, leave comments below, and we'll definitely get in touch with you. So I'm going to rope my wife in. She wants to say bye to you, Father John.
Okay.
Nice meeting you, Father.
Good to meet you.
And we couldn't rope in Matushka too bad, but we say, I give my regards, of course. And so, Father John, I'm going to end this show as I end all of them by quoting Jesus Sirach, fight to the death for the truth, everybody. The Lord God will fight for you. God bless you. Have a great day.